This panel is part of our Taking on Transformation project, which will outline a vision for transforming youth justice in this country. For our youth justice portfolio at the Justice Lab, this vision of transformation includes a focus on 4 key things: closing youth prisons, directing funds away from incarceration, investing resources in the communities most impacted by incarceration, and centering those who are most impacted in designing and leading efforts to create safety. So today's discussion will hone in on centering youth and families who have been most impacted by these systems in the discussions of how to create safety and well-being for young people. Our panelists have a range of personal and professional perspectives on both the why and how of young people and their families leading this work, and I know it's going to be an incredibly rich discussion. With that, I want to turn it over to our amazing moderator, who will then introduce our panel and get the discussion going. Hernan Carvente Martinez is the founder and CEO of Healing Ninjas, Inc., a social enterprise seeking to expand access to health and wellness, resources for communities of color, and end mental health stigma. He is a Chicano social entrepreneur, community organizer, and leader in the fight to end youth incarceration. Currently, he's also the National Youth Partnership Strategist at the Youth First Initiative, a national campaign focused on closing youth prisons and reinvesting that money into community alternatives. He's a member of the Council of Criminal Justice, serves on the board of Community Connection for Youth, and is a member of several philanthropic funds that support the leadership of directly impacted communities. Previously, he's worked as a program analyst at the Vera Institute for Justice, where he worked to ensure that youth and families were included in statewide policy reform efforts around the country. He's been awarded the Spirit of Youth Award by the Coalition of Juvenile Justice and the Next Generation Champion for Change Award by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, and he's also a 2021 Reebok Human Rights Award winner. So with that, I will turn it over to Hernan. Thank you so much for leading this conversation, and take it away.
Thank you, Alex. And I was cringing, y'all, as he was reading my bio, because I did not realize he was going to do that. But I'm really grateful for the opportunities that I've been offered for the last 10 years since coming home from prison. I think for many of you who probably are on this webinar, I probably know you in one way or another. And you can imagine how much of a privilege it is to go from being a youth voice and a young person who started off in this movement 10 years ago, being the one talking about these issues from a personal lens, to now being able to facilitate these meaningful conversations with other dope organizers, leaders, and system practitioners who are really doing the damn thing and doing it in a way that actually makes sense for our community. So with that, I just want to, kind of lay the foundation that this conversation is really meant to, sort of build on all of the momentum that's happening around the country. Our 3 esteemed panelists are all people who have, in one way or another, shaped their systems, their communities, or the people that they're actively working with in one way or another by empowering them and doing the work that they need to do to really ensure that young people, families, and systems are being built in a way that are supportive of one another, but more importantly, to the benefit of community. And I think when, 10 years ago when I came out, we used to talk about youth voice as like the thing that everybody wanted to do. We slowly but surely transitioned to youth leadership and really putting young people in a place where they were being engaged. And we started talking about youth leadership and youth engagements anonymously. And I think we are now at a pivotal moment in our justice movement where, because of COVID, because of everything happening, we realize that it's not just about placing young people in a leadership role, but it's about really working in partnership with them and adults really serving as not just the support, but also as a coach, as a mentor, and honestly, just as another human being interacting with another human being. So, although our 3 panelists have professional roles, I just want to remind everybody that they're also human at the end of the day. We are all human at the end of the day. And that if we're doing this work, it's because I believe that all of us just have a commitment to wanting to do this well. And so I want to introduce them each. I won't read through all their bios, y'all, because y'all can read that on your own time. I think we all want to hear from them more than read their bios, but I'm just going to give y'all a little bit of a preview to each of them. So first, we have my homie Chuy Soto, who is a youth leader in the New Mexico Youth Justice Coalition. And I've had the pleasure of working with Chuy for about the last year, supporting them and building a campaign to close prisons in New Mexico, but more importantly, supporting young people like Chuy to be leaders in this fight to close youth prisons and to really support them in uplifting their voice. We have Kathy Wright, who is the executive director of the New Jersey Parents Caucus, where she's developed programs and supportive services that really empower parents and caregivers to create systemic change. And then we also have TJ Bull, who is an administrator at the Pierce County Juvenile Court Pierce County Juvenile Court. And he has also been working with the Juvenile Detention Alternatives Initiative and Probation Transformation in Pierce County, where he has worked to create paradigm shifts regarding positive youth development, family engagement, and community partnerships. And TJ has also established strong data-driven culture using the learn, manage, and improve model. And so without further ado, y'all, I want to pose a question to the panelists to kind of like get us started with really laying a foundation for everybody, especially because each of you are bringing different experiences to this table. And the first question being and I'm going to direct it to you, Chuy, specifically too first, because I want to hear from young people specifically. How have your experiences with system change and transforming youth justice either included or not included young people and families who have been impacted by those systems? And what were some of the outcomes of including them and not including them? So like being very real, at points where young people have been included in New Mexico, when has it worked? And when it hasn't been, effective, when you haven't included them, what has gone missing or where could have been better?
Thank you. So hello, everyone. I think that it hasn't really worked at all due to the fact that like, because we're involved doesn't mean we're listened to. And that's speaking mainly with the system, not really organizations, but the organizations have put on a lot of work and there has been change in that. But when it comes directly to speaking with the systems, just from my personal experiences, going to the D home and talking to those types of people, we were kind of just there. And due to that fact, there's really been nothing good coming from it. And so that's why I'm glad that I have the organization I have today to bring that good, because the system's not doing anything.
When you think about the system, Chuy, I think part of what we're always talking about is that, all we need to do is include youth voice into transformation efforts and things are potentially going to change. Do you feel that that's all we need, that we just need to include young people and have their voice, or is there more?
There's so much more to it, because like I said, I could come and talk to anybody for hours, but if they're not really listening, then there's really no point. And it's more than just talking. There has to be consistency, there has to be trust, and there has to be reliability. Like I have to trust that you're going to listen. You have to be consistent into what I'm saying and showing that you actually support what I'm saying. And I have to rely on you that you're going to do your job correctly. And that's just, we haven't seen that yet.
That's super real. I want to extend that question now to Kathy. Not only, and maybe you have something to add to what Chuy has said, but what about parents and family members when we're talking about including them in the system, in reform efforts, in transformation efforts? What has gone well, and when we haven't done it, what does that look like?
Wow, that's a loaded question. So from where I sit and watching, it's a difficult process. It is, I totally hear what Chuy is saying. It is a difficult process. And what's interesting about it is that it may appear to seem as if there is penetration and there is movement, but I think when you really dig down into it, and let's talk about where parents and caregivers have been given real power, or youth, real power, real leadership, when we can talk about what is most authentic. I think if you look through that lens, it's a little bit, it's difficult to see. So I'm gonna say that there has not been much, while it may appear to be much. I think if we were to ask youth and parents, just them, right? We would get a totally different answer. And I think part of it is because, professionals, providers, even the advocacy community, there's difficulty for them in sharing power. and allowing parents and youth to move out of that space of being that identified client. It's difficult because there's a lack of trust. You know, it's interesting. We talk about the lack of trust with parents, right? With the system, right? With the youth justice system, which is true. But there's also a lack of trust in the other end. Can we trust you, parents who've produced these children, right? Can we trust you to be involved in that? You know, because there's this big blame game, you know, where this is your fault, this is your child, that, you know, and so we have to move beyond that, because if we don't, we're never going to get to that space, you know, where we can talk about truly closing youth prisons. We're going to always have those governors like our governor, Murphy, who profess to close. Yes, we're going to close the only youth prison in New Jersey. As we sit here and the youth prison is still open, and it has the highest percentage of sexual abuse of any other youth prison in the country. So that would be my response to that.
And that's a very real response, Kathy. I think you and Julie are both touching upon really important points, which is that there is this perception that maybe we've been doing a lot of great work on behalf of youth and families. And I don't want to discredit, you know, nonprofits and, you know, other leaders in systems that have done this well. But if we were to really sit down and have this conversation with, you know, other Chewies, other Kathys, other people working, you know, in those communities, would they say the same? Right? Like, because we're over here sort of at the top of that conversation. And oftentimes the people who don't listen the most are system leaders. And so I want to pivot to TJ, you know, in your experience, TJ, what were the outcomes of including families in some of the system reform work that you've been a part of? And, you know, what happened when you didn't include them? And what was the difference in the work that you've seen thus far?
Yeah, thank you so much. I feel really honored to be on this panel with my colleagues here, and really appreciate what they're bringing. You know, I want to be open and honest about our journey and kind of some of the things that we've been going through, and honestly, we have not figured it all out. But you know, thanks to the families and the youth voice in the last, since 2015, since we really made this a priority, we've really shifted and have become to grow, and it's really accelerated our reform efforts. And when I think of this, I think of it in three different ways. I think of one is like youth and family focus groups all the time. Anytime we came up with like our new programs or what are we thinking that we might want to do, it's really reaching out to the community and listening and asking questions around what is valuable. This is kind of what we have out in front of us, is how much money we have. What do you want to do with it? So really leaning into that. And we found it's really important, like who does those focus groups, not to have a system folk do it, but to have people that are trusted in the community, have former family members or trusted community partners. The second area I think about is like this ongoing case planning and assessment with young people, really shifting the mental model of, you know, moving away from that old blame and shame narrative of when you see young people coming in, and the narrative for so often in the system was, you know, oh, the parents must be at fault, and the parents feel that coming in. And so really shifting that to like, they're the experts in their situation. They have the skills and the strength and the resilience to overcome. They've overcome other things in their life. So really, how do we joint plan together? What do we need to be successful here? And also like share some of the accountability measures, like with our opportunity-based probation model that was built with families. And it's about giving them the opportunity to earn points, and the families give the points to the young people, the system can. So it's like partnership, working together to support young people in their growth. And it's about behavior change. It's not about punishment and accountability as much. So, and then the third part I think about is really embedding that family voice into your system. And I think the analogy that works for me is like, instead of just inviting someone to dinner, it's like saying, what do you want to cook? What do we want to prepare? And setting it all up from the get-go. So they need to be at the decision-making table. So we chose to establish a family council, which is made up of family members who've been through the system. We contract with them to meet monthly. We pay them a stipend. We feed them. They create bylaws. They review all of our programs. They review our data. We give them access. They sit on our interview panels. They're on our steering committee. So really bringing them in to be at the decision-making table, I think is super important. And also having awareness of the inner workings of the court, the acronyms, all the data, the system actors, who are they, build relationships with them. So that way they can make measurable change and be part of that. In addition to the moving the system forward, I think then it's super helpful to create space for them to partner with new families coming in, because they are the best positioned to support them and make sure that their needs are being met. So those are some of the things that I think about, the 3 different categories when you mention that.
Thank you, TJ. And I just want to acknowledge that I've seen the questions in the chat, and I'm seeing that in the Q&A also. I have some questions that I'm going to ask that hopefully will answer some of those, but if by the end they are not answered, I will be sure, promise, to get those questions out there to our panelists. But I just want to keep a flow of the conversation based on what we're hearing. But, you know, Chuy, I want to come back to you right after hearing TJ as a system administrator in Pierce County in Washington, right? Like, we're talking about you now also being in New Mexico, and have you or have you not been able to interact with someone like TJ as a system leader that believes that youth and families should be centered in the ways that he just described, right? And like, what examples do you have, Chuy, in New Mexico of where youth have actually led the effort, if at any?
Oh yeah, so I've definitely worked with a lot of systems people, and my experience is that with sharing the space doesn't necessarily mean you're sharing power. And if you're not sharing power, then that's just tokenism. And that's kind of only been my experience when it comes to the systematic stuff. And so with that, then that just builds mistrust when you realize that you're just being used for their paperwork. And so there's no productivity that's going to come from that. So, yeah.
No. So could you also elaborate on, so if we wanted to do it well, right, what would it look like if we didn't want tokenization to happen, and if we wanted to hold systems accountable to including young people more intentionally?
I think you have to give them their own space within yours. Like, give them this is for them. Like, you all are here, but this is for them, and they're here to talk about it and make their own decision. We're just here to listen. You know, we're not here to give our input because that's all we've ever done, because it's their job to do their input. Now you're going to listen to us and how we actually feel, with no interruptions, and not shutting our ideas down or try to intimidate us, because that's all systems people like to do, is intimidate you to not speak. They don't want you to speak. They don't want to listen.
Thank you, Chuy, for keeping it real. Kathy, what would you add to that, sort of in response to TJ's thoughts, right? Because I feel like we have a harder time engaging young people, and Chuy, I definitely want to come back to you at some point to like discuss what are some strategies that people can actually do to be more intentional about that. But from a family end, I feel like systems have always been more comfortable with including families because, quote unquote, they're also adults. But there's always challenges also with including families because of the mistrust with the system. So what are some of those reflections that you might have, Kathy, to what TJ has laid out as like centering families too, but ultimately, what are some of the challenges that would come from that?
Yeah, he's absolutely right. Because ultimately it comes down to the sharing and the giving of power. So a good example is, particularly in the system field, you will have system partners who say, well, you know, our youth are included or our parents are included, and they have real responsibilities. And the question then becomes, okay, and they may say, you know, we've hired them as a whatever position it may be. When really what we're talking about, when you look at it, a typical nonprofit organization, the question for me becomes, well, who's on your board, right? Do we have a youth representation on your board? Do we have parent representation on your board? Because that's the area where decisions are made, right? That's where the governance comes from. So even sometimes, and I hate to use that analogy, but even sometimes when, you know, we feel like we're sort of thrown a bone, right? By, oh, okay, well, here's a quarter time position. And we're going to need you to show up at all these meetings and relive your trauma, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Underneath all of that, what we're missing is we're missing authenticity. We're missing the true belief that we are wanting partners, right? And I think that shift to partnership is difficult for a lot of systems. It's okay to like pull them in areas that you are most needy, and where the organization is lacking, but true partnership. So for example, having them head up a department, I bet Chewy can tell you the number of system folks that he's met in New Mexico, and also the number of youth who are head of a department, who have total responsibility for a particular program, who are evaluators. And that's what you don't see. And that's where we have to get there. We have to get there. We have to, because we have to, and this is difficult for a lot of system folks, we have to recognize that we're in the midst of this paradigm shift. There has to be this shifting of power. It's like when folks will mention to me in meetings, so, well, what did you think about, the solitary confinement? How has that impacted some of your youth caucus members? I said, well, I can't answer that. I know it's inhumane. I said, but here's what I can do. I can connect you to some of our youth caucus members that can speak to you about that. And however, when they show up to your meetings, they're going to get paid in the same way you get paid when you come, right? So there has to be that authentic, and it, sometimes I struggle so much with it because I can't understand how people don't understand that. But without going into a whole trilogy about how we use racism, right, as a tool to dissect juvenile justice reform, I think a lot of times it comes down to that. Do we trust these Black and brown children? Do we trust these Black and brown parents and caregivers to not only show, do we trust them to lead? Do we trust them, to get, can we give them this program to run? And I think that's where a lot of it, we have to change that. We have to change, as my mother would say to me, the way in which we view the world. We have to.
Oof. Kathy, thank you for such deep reflections. And I think part of what really stands out to me from what you're saying right now is also, we are at a pivotal moment where we are thinking about how to see, kind of give power back to communities and families and young people in more than authentic ways, but like hyper intentional ways, right? Like where it's very clear that they do have the power, that they have decision-making ability, and more importantly, that they actually are true partners in the work that we are currently doing. And so, TJ, and I didn't mean to like take your response and kind of just throw it at everyone else to see what they said, but I definitely want to bring it back to you and sort of reflecting on a question that was actually asked too, which actually talks about power and how it shows up in some of the things that you mentioned at the very beginning. And just how you've been able to really be intentional about giving powers to young people and families, whether it's in the focus groups that you mentioned or in some of the other stuff that you are doing. But ultimately, someone also asked, who is the dispositive voice when youth and families disagree with system folks? So you could have power, you can have everything that you laid out, but when you get pushback from youth and families, how have you seen that play out, in Pierce County, and what has been the power shift?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that clearly does come up. And I think in the beginning, when we first started partnering, we weren't fully prepared for that. We weren't prepared for some of the challenges and some of the, it makes sense now when I look back and I really understand, like when you bring folks in who don't trust the system and maybe have been marginalized for long periods of time, and really just understanding like all of the history and the pain and the suffering. And so we had a lot of that in the room, and we had to honor that. We had to, for me, it was like, really, we had to avoid being defensive. Like the system in general tends to be very defensive. It's always, well, I didn't do that. I'm not racist. I'm not. And it's like, so really was challenging all of us as leaders to say, you need to not be defensive. We're trying to be open, authentic, listen to understand. You're not trying to fix things. You're trying to listen to understand and then create a path forward together. So instead of I think some of the old mental model was more like, okay, they're going to bring us, they're going to tell us what the problem is and we need to fix it. Instead, we had to shift our model of like, okay, well, how do we sit with you, diagnose what you're bringing to the table, share some like how the system currently works, what are some of the legal challenges to that, what are some of the policy practices, but then also like, where's the wiggle room? Where do we start? Where do we, what's step one? Like, we might not get to step 10, but what's step one together that we can take to move forward?
Mm. I love that. And I love the realness, TJ, that you're bringing, right? Because I want to be very clear, as much as I've been for abolition for the last 4 years working at Youth First, I know that there are dope people in systems right now that are trying really hard to change it from within. And it is a pain because you're not only going up against entire structures, but you're going up against entire institutions built around maintaining the status quo. And a lot of that does involve, racial and ethnic disparities. A lot of that does involve the socioeconomic barriers that are put in front of families and young people. So there are so many barriers that we can talk about. And so I want to uplift that. I want to like value people like TJ who are in systems trying to work within the very, construct that is problematic oftentimes to youth and families. And Chuy, when we think about what system leaders should be mindful of as they try to engage young people, and to kind of bring it back to a question that somebody had asked before too, which was more around when you think about engaging young people in some of the work that TJ is mentioning in some of these transformation efforts, how do we do it intentionally and also keep in mind the young people that are not ready to engage in this work, right? Like that maybe are hard to reach, the ones that you sometimes talk about, last time when you and I were on a call and you were like, yeah, sometimes I get pissed off because I'm like, people don't get it and I don't see why they don't get it, but they like, they're like me. So how can we be intentional about including young people across the spectrum of this work?
Yeah, to answer the first part about being mindful, I think systems people have to be really mindful of the institutionalization and the oppression that their work has already put on the young people. Like their job has caused so much trauma for families for generations, and there's been such a mistrust, rightfully so. And like the young people, they just don't trust the system. So you're gonna come, you're gonna buy some meeting, you're gonna give us some pizza and some salad, and let us talk for 10 minutes, and we're supposed to like think you have our best interest, and you always have. Like that just isn't how it works. And like the second it doesn't go as planned, the system turns their back on us again. They're like, well, this didn't work. We knew it wasn't going to work because they are who they are. That's the mindset. And so, there's not much that can come from that when their mindset is that. And just like I said earlier, with trust, consistency, and reliability, that's like the only true way to have unity between the youth.
When you, I'd like for you to also kind of like expand, because I think part of what I've realized, and this is me even saying it from just doing this as a fellow community organizer, doing the work from the community end of things, it's organically hard to just include young people because, again, not only are we talking about these systems, but we're also talking about layers upon layers of like other personal stuff going on, right? Like housing issues, basic needs not being met, mental health issues not, being addressed. So when we think about the holistic kid, like all of Chuy, what would Chuy need to be effective in this work?
I needed a lot. Let's see, I'm 21 right now. I needed 5 years of constant support through every downfall I've ever had. And that's the only reason why I'm here. But it takes a lot of patience from the people working with me. And I'm so grateful that they have that they have the patience and they have the love and support that they have for me, not only for me, just for all youth and all their community, because like, it's just crazy, like I don't want to get all emotional about it, but I think that's truly what it is. It's about like the heart that everybody has and that everybody puts into it and the understanding. And that's why when it comes to individuals who have already lived through my experiences, they're the ones that have helped me the most because they can relate to me. And it's all about relatability as well. Like I know that they're not lying when they say that it's hard, and they understand me when I say that it's hard. And they've also come to a place where they can help me and I can trust that they have my best interest.
Thank you for being real, Chuy, about that. And I didn't mean to put you on the spot with that question, but I think everyone who's listening just genuinely wants to know how to include young people. And the reality of it's what Chewy said. I'm 10 years into my career, and I'm like, I wish I had 10 years of that freaking support to be where I am today. And I haven't had it. And Chewy and I, I've had to find people to support us. And, it's been hard to just figure it out as we go. And Kathy, as we think about that frame, right, of the support that young people need, what intentional supports do we need for families? And, what is the considerations that people need to have if they really want to authentically bring families into this work?
Well, I think that parents and families need similar support. Here's the thing. They need to be seen holistically in the same way youth do. Who am I? They need to be seen for who they are, right? And the services need to be specific to who they are. They can't be, we as system folks, we can't just bring a series of answers or a series of services or whatever you want to call it to them and say, okay, this is what we offer. Can you please fit into this? Right? We need to look at each person, in a very holistic manner. And more than likely, like what Chewy was saying, there'll be similarities with his peers. They're going to need they're going to need dignity. They're going to need respect, right? They need to be seen, and they absolutely, because our youth caucus members tell us all the time, we need to be heard. But it's interesting because different people hear different levels, right? And one of the things in the training that we do for parents is one of the things I tell them, as I said, I want you to learn to listen to what people don't say, because it is there in that space, right, that you will find the answers. And the same, I think, is true for youth. And so it's a different level of listening that even I have to do with them. I have to, first of all, just as adults and system folks, we need to quiet ourselves to really hear them. Because I think a lot of times what happens is, people are so busy processing what they believe to be true and needy for families and youth that they don't hear what they're actually saying. They're, and like we just spoke about, they're human, period, across the board. So, for example, as a parent, I don't necessarily, or a family member, I don't want to sit down at a table with system partners and they're using jargon and all these acronyms, and I have no idea what they're talking about. I don't want to be put in that position, because that position doesn't make me feel good, right? And if this is about my child, right, I really don't feel good. So now I'm in a place where I'm just like flabbergasted, because I'm like, okay, not only is this about me, but this is also about my child, who, as Toni Morrison says, is the best of me. So now I really feel defensive. So what we try and do, we want to give parents and caregivers, they come to us for free training. We have 15 sessions with them, and where we give them that knowledge, we explain to them, this is what those acronyms mean. This is why we need you to be at the table. This is what we want you to do when you're meeting with legislators. This is, and help them to frame their voice. Because once we can do that, then with the system folks, they need to have a same level of training, which teaches them how to hear, right? So that they don't get, frustrated, right, when they're dealing with parents. Or, one of the things that I say in training, I'll say, okay, when a young Black man walks into your office for an appointment, what's the first thing that you see? And I'll never forget, I was doing the training, and there was probably about 12 probation officers and one social worker, and the social worker jumped up and she said, I see color. But what was interesting is that was like this emotional reaction. She didn't really mean to stand up like that and say that. And so I clapped for her. Now, keep in mind, I'm in the front, I'm the instructor, and I clapped and I said, and I want to let you know why I clapped for you. I said, because you spoke your truth, you
Mm,
know, where everybody else was thinking that. You had the audacity and the strength and the courage to stand up. And so I think that that's what we need, a lot of that, right? We need a lot of just making people feel comfortable to talk about really what some of the issues truly are, and until then, we're just going to continue to have like these conversations where people are talking above and underneath and around, and we have to make sure parents and family members have that education, have that knowledge, so they can sit at the table and they feel like, okay, number one, I deserve to be here, I should be here, and my voice is valued. And
mm.
that's one of otherwise we're not going to get to a world in which we don't criminalize children, because that's what we're doing. That's truly what we're doing.
Yes. Okay, Kathy. I don't know. I'm just gonna put you for the rest of the conversation. I'm just kidding. I really appreciate everything you're laying out for us right now, because what you just shared is really sort of like the similarities in which young people are going to be experiencing the same layers of sort of separation from this work and from us being able to partner in intentional ways. But you named something that I think is really important that has come up as a theme in some of the Q&A, which is, some of our families, some of our young people, Chewy, you mentioned this earlier too, are also just not going to trust systems at this point. They're not looking at systems for the solution. They're actively pushing for these alternatives that don't involve the system. And so there are communities that, because of all the harm that the system has caused, just don't see themselves sitting at a table with someone from the system trying to play nice to come up with a solution. In some places, we are seeing communities saying, we are trying to do away with the system and bring back the power to our communities. And so, TJ, it's probably going to be a loaded question and a heavy question, but I feel like you got this. But ultimately, when we think about, oh, Chewy, did you want to add something?
Oh yeah, but I could go after if it doesn't fit. But I just wanted to say that, like, how you said about like speaking and things like that. Just the experiences that I have is that I spoke to, well, me and like 18 other youth spoke to one of the secretaries for CYFD in our state, and we got a whole certificate from the governor saying thank you. And then a month later, we had to talk to a new one. And so that type of frustration, and that comes with like, you kind of just feel defeated because I just shared my trauma. Me and 18 other youth just shared our trauma, and we're gonna have to do it all over again. And that type of thing, that makes us not want to talk to you guys, well, not to you guys, but to the system anymore, because it's like, I just did, and things that I had to do it again. And so, and all I got was a paper for it, like, but I just wanted to, really say that, because once you were talking, that kind of brought it up out of me.
No, thank you for sharing. And it does add context to why I'm asking that question for TJ. But, our communities in many ways have grown tired of just like not being able to be heard. But also, when we are heard, sometimes going back to the same table with the same problem the next year, trying to still solve it, but with different people or even the same people. And so, some of the question is, as we're really thinking about this reality of a world where community members are envisioning a world without systems, without prisons, how does that land for system stakeholders, CJ? How are systems really grappling with this like reconciliation of the harm that has happened? And how has it been done in Pierce County specifically? But if you know of any other jurisdictions that have been really kind of sitting with this, what has that looked like?
Yeah, I do agree that that's very loaded. I mean, the first thing that I would say is, as Kathy was talking, I just 100% believe exactly what she was saying. And I want to like really just like say thank you. Like that just really spoke to me. Like I totally agree with what she was saying. I really think like we've been really struggling with that, like really trying to be honest and supportive and, not like keep inviting people back and not do anything with the information, and to really like, and so, I think it's really, really important though that the folks in the organization, like we start internally and, how are you treating each other in the workplace? What's the culture? What's the mental model like? If you try to be authentic with a family member and try to be engaging, but then you go to the water cooler with your colleague and then talk bad about parents, like that's not cool. Like it needs to start with in the agency, how do we treat each other? Are people in the agency valued? Are we walking the talk with each other? Because if staff feel valued and people feel like they can show up as their best self and they can show up as authentic selves in the workplace, and diversity is welcomed in the workplace, then they're much more likely to be open and diverse and inclusive with families. And so I really feel like that is really important for the system folks to really be looking internally at how what's their mental model around families? What is their behaviors? How do they support each other? How do they create inclusive environments for the people who show up there? Because if you have people of color in the organization who don't feel like the agency supports them, how are they expected to support our families of color who are coming in? Like that is going to be really challenging, is what I hear from folks. And so we're really trying to lean into that piece and just really treat each person individually in an agency. So that way we can show up as our best selves and create that space to talk with families around what is really going on and how do we walk alongside you with the things that you're wrestling with, knowing that the system ain't fair, and to be honest and around the system challenges. The system disproportionately impacts brown and Black children. We know this. It's been like, you don't have to look far for that data. So why hide from that? Just own that. How do we work together to overcome that, to create equity, and really creating space for families to be able to talk about that and share how do we do better to support them, I think would be really important.
And I like the framing that you just used, CJ, and I think it applies across the spectrum, not just with the system. And I believe this because of just having had to do that internal work on myself as an individual, right? It's not just about systems, doing that internal work within, the structures that are within that system, but it's also getting to the ground level of what people are working in these systems, what values they are bringing to these systems, and also what experiences have shaped the reasons why they have come into these systems to do work with youth and families. And I think that that's a thing that we don't get too deep about, because again, that's really targeting the individual level sort of work that needs to happen, and deconstructing racial bias and other things that we are sort of internalizing every day through media, through social media, through regular media, but ultimately also through the constant work that we are engaged in as part of this transformation effort. So I want to be intentional of time, y'all. So giving like the next 6 minutes to some more of these targeted questions, and then giving the last 10 minutes so we can answer some of the other ones. But Kathy, I want to be mindful that 2 people have already asked this question, so I'm going to ask this to you right now. But you mentioned in the beginning something about sexual abuse in one of the facilities in New Jersey happening. And we've been asked that question twice, so I want to be mindful that people are thinking about it. If there's anything being done about that, which facility it is, and if there's anything else that members who are looking into this webinar can do to support that.
There are a couple things. First of all, we have because there's another piece to this, right? So obviously, like, I just want to say real quick, like Columbia Justice Labs doing a great job elevating these issues, okay? But in addition to this, and that's why I'm saying this, that we could do this every day, right? Over the course of months, and talk about all the issues. But one of them is accountability. So, and I think Chuy would agree with me, right? So the system wants our youth to be accountable, right? But the question becomes when the system and the government folks and the government entities do things like break the law and they're not being held accountable, right? And so what's interesting in the case, and that's part of our petition, right? Calling on the legislators and the governor because, hey, wait a minute, we passed these bills, this is law. But they continue to be allowed to do these things to children while they're incarcerated, which they're breaking law. That's number one. So that's sort of like frames that. And then the next piece to that would be, in the case of Jamesburg, we have one youth prison in the state of New Jersey. And that youth prison, and folks can Google that, has the highest rate of sexual abuse of any other prison, youth prison, in the entire country. And now, so for New Jersey, we like to believe that we are so politically correct. Things like that don't happen. And so what was interesting was the quietness
Mm.
in the advocacy community when this happened. Just this quietness. No one was willing to raise this issue, to look into it, poke into it. And so we kind of feel like, other than the Parents Caucus, because we're the ones, right, that are always raising these things, and folks are saying, where did you get this information from? Well, this has been all over, like NewJersey.com and all throughout the internet. And yet, right now, that is absolutely true. That is, that is absolutely true. And I happen to also not only be a parent, but I'm also the niece of a warden of Mountain View Youth Correctional Facility, which, even though it sounds like a youth prison, is actually an adult prison. My uncle has passed away. And one of the things he shared with me, the reason why he retired from the Air Force, he went to Jamesburg, he left Jamesburg and went on to Mountain View. He said, because, and we're going back 15 years. Yeah, 15 years. He said, because the sexual abuse and the treatment of kids was just so rampant, and just the word he used wasn't inhumane. It was I forget the exact word he used, but it was inhumane, and that's the reason why he left there. I think he worked there for 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks, and he left. So this is, and here's the other interesting thing I'll throw out to folks to let them know. If you look at the front of Jamesburg, there is the front where you go into the actual building. There is this large awning across the entrance, and it has 1864, 1867. And so it reminds everyone, obviously, of 1865 and the year slaves were emancipated. So, yeah. And that is a true thing. It does. And that's part of the reason why we must. It's not we should. We must move to a model where everyone, right, the government particularly, is held accountable, because Governor Murphy, he said when he won the election, that was his promise. We were going to close Jamesburg. That hasn't happened. He hasn't responded. He's been reelected again. So, and then the other piece of that, this is why we have to move to a world in which we don't use incarceration, right? Like we have to think about, what are we doing when it comes to incarcerating children? We're doing that. We're throwing them in youth prisons, and we're expecting them to come home and be what? Rehabilitated, holistic, right? We have to really, and in order for us to do that, we have to dig down into people's biases. And that's where the difficulty comes from, because the vast majority of the people, they're oh, well, of course they need to be in prison, because I don't want my daughter to graduate from college and date that young man, so they feel better. They feel more comfortable when our kids are in prison, right? This is the thinking, right?
Thank you, Kathy. I appreciate you sort of offering that. And for anyone who had that specific question, if you want to connect with Kathy after the fact, the information for all the panelists will be sent out if you want to reach out directly to see how you can support. But thanks for giving more context for everybody that was asking that. And Troy, I want to hand it over to you. If there's something that you want to add, and folks, if you have a particular question, please drop it into the Q&A. The chat kind of, I lose the questions in the chat. So if you're dropping it in the chat, I might have to scroll all the way up to find it. So drop it in the Q&A and it'll be right there for me to see. But Chuy, with respect to just, and I want to be intentional too, is like, we're kind of coming close to time. How do we, moving forward, hold systems accountable to including young people? But at the same time, what do you imagine being the reality of how we should be engaging young people moving forward? And again, you can bring some of your experiences through SWAP and the New Mexico Youth Justice Coalition as well.
I think accountability is one of I guess one of my favorite things to talk about when it comes to talking with systems people, because they love to shift the blame and like just follow the narrative. And it's crazy to me because you know, like to this day in 2022, there's still meetings going on saying the reason why some kids have to wear ankle bracelets is because their pants are sagging. And you know, that's kind of insane to me because it's just like that's totally not the reason. And you know, there's this big thing that you should take accountability, and we do. We definitely take accountability. I think people realize that we're way harder on ourselves than people are to us. And so when we already know that our wrongdoings, you know, we know about everything, and then someone comes with a demeaning manner and just says how much of a shitty person we are because of the choice that we feel like we had to make, we're just gonna shut down. I'm the king of shutting down. I've shut down my whole life when someone has come just yelling at me because I'm like, you're not gonna get an answer out of me with that type of attitude. Because why would I even trust you? Why would I trust you when you're acting like that? Like that is just like, yes, it's not how you approach somebody. And so, you know, when with the adults tend to have temper tantrums and power trips. And that's just it. They like to release their emotions on us and expect us to just take it. Like that's not how we operate. And like I just feel like until accountability can really be taken from the adults, there's no real growth that can come until really they just have to lead by example. Just really just lead by example.
Thank you, Chewy. And I'm gonna try to go to the Q&A for a second, y'all, and I'd like for you all to be as brief as you can, but as pointed as you can, because I do also want to come back to give you all some final words. So one of the other questions I was asked here, for any of the panelists, have you engaged in any type of truth and reconciliation process with systems and community, including impacted youth and families, to acknowledge the deep generational harm and begin to move forward? If so, what has that looked like? If we could have one of you answer that, that'd be great. Let us know who.
I don't think I have had a conversation with systems people in that subject at all.
Yeah.
TJ, Kathy, no?
The closest we've gotten to that is what we've done within the context of our professional parent advocacy training. There's a class on conflict and resolution, and the power of persuasion. And what we do is we will have a parent that takes on the role of a system partner. And then the system partner take on the role of the parent, and we'll pull them together and engage them in a conversation. Because what I found, you know, as an ex-professor, is that it is easier for people to talk about the difficult things if they're not in the space that they are meant to be in. So so for example, you know, I'll give the example outside of juvenile justice. You have the child welfare worker, who the parent is now the child welfare worker. And then you have the child welfare worker who's now the parent, and the two of them engage in a conversation. It allows them to kind of get to some level of authenticity that they might not be able to do. Or you can use, we've used also probation officers, parole officers. We've used an attorney, and just getting them to swap roles and be able to understand that, feel that, and also to engage in that dialogue where they can start to identify and see the, you know, the aggressiveness or the passivity, because that's, you know, all part of conflict resolution, and helping them to get towards something that looks like assertiveness, and helping them to understand this is the way in which your language makes me feel. So even though, like, you're saying to me, we want you to be a part of this, you know, we want you to include this in our reform efforts, your words look different than your actions do. And the space that you're not giving me space. Where am I supposed to sit at? To where, you know, like, where's Chewy supposed to sit at in this entire space where I can feel like I own this piece? Give me ownership you know? And because that's really, I mean, that's really what they need. And I have to say too, we as older adults, we have to learn to make room, right? We have to. We have to sometimes move out the way. As our youth caucus members, they tell me everything. They're like, Miss Kathy, you have to move out and I'm happy to do that. You know what I mean? And we have to be okay to do that and understand that we're not losing in this. System partners, you're not losing. You know, you're creating something that's going to, you know, strengthen our cities, our states, our communities, and the world. We have to look at that.
Thank you, Kathy. I know we're coming close to time and I feel pressure as the moderator to make sure that we end on time, to respect people's time. So I know that there are questions that are present. Some of them we're talking about how would restorative work and community management look like safely without relying on being policed. And similarly, another person had actively worked with any restorative justice organizations. Have you seen that help? So restorative justice is a theme in the questions. Can we do it effectively without being policed all the way through? And then also this question, which was around, in lots of drug treatment programs, the therapist isn't considered qualified unless they are in recovery. Perhaps system leaders must have navigated the system before leading or working in it. How could that be embraced without being all about identity politics? So I'm laying out these questions, not because I want them to be answered in the next 2 minutes, but also because I just want to give you all an opportunity to maybe have some closing remarks that maybe connect some of these questions to those remarks. And so I want to start off with TJ first, then Kathy, and then ending off with Chuy.
Yeah, thank you. So I mean, I think I've really appreciated listening to Kathy and Chuy, and I thank you for being a part of it, letting me be a part of this. I think what we're doing right now is not working. So I would say, you know, I would challenge folks to be open to trying to do something different, bringing family, youth voice in, create space for, you know, reimagining what it could be like, really truly creating that space. Because what we're doing right now is not working. I think that's where I would leave it.
Thank you, TJ. Kathy?
I want to piggyback off of what someone just indicated or that you just read about, and which is true. In the substance use space, that's what it looks like. And that's really what we're trying to get to, which means that the people who have been most impacted, where are they? And why are they not leading this effort? And I'll throw one thing out there. I have been in meetings where parents were asked to show their driver's license in order to get into the building for the meeting. So things like that, we have to recognize that we need them to reform this. We're not going to fix this without them. Very much like, you know, the CADC, that's the person that that they're speaking about, that's their title, and they have to have lived experience. That's that peer-to-peer piece. That's the piece that Chuy was talking about when, you know, they understand, you know, his what would you call that? His village, right? And that's what it is, his block, as the kids would say, youth caucus members would say. Ms. Kathy, this is our block.
I respect that. Thank you, Kathy. And you know, you're bringing up incredible message in there that's literally where the work is at too, in terms of including peer-to-peer support. Chuy, any final remarks on your end?
I guess one thing I just really want to stress is like more of a question, and we had said it in one of the meetings we met with before, is just something that was asked to me a long time ago. And one of the things that I participated in is that, how are you complicit with the system? And so I want people to really think about that. And how are you taking accountability for your own actions? And how has it played a part in being complicit with the system? Just people to sit on that for a while.
Thank you, Chuy. Thank you to all of you for being a part of this. And thank you to everyone who's participated. I know I'm going over time, but again, if you are a part of this, you will be getting link to the recording. It will exist on the Columbia Justice Lab website. But more importantly, if you want to talk to any of these amazing individuals, be sure to reach out and know that this work is ongoing. There is no clear blueprint for how to do this. I know we got manuals out there. I know we have things that we can rely on, but the reality is that we need to be working more together to be able to come up with these solutions. And so I'm really grateful to all three of you for just, indulging in this conversation. But more importantly, thanks to the audience too. And you're getting a lot of praise. Thank yous all in the chat. So hopefully you're reading the chat. We're really grateful to all of you. And again, I'm gonna stop holding y'all hostage. Thank you again for coming, y'all.
Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.